Seraphina Mercer had everything: a life of luxury, a powerful billionaire husband, and a future that seemed untouchable. Ophelia Maddox had nothing: no wealth, no status, just a dangerous secret that could bring an empire crashing down. The two women had never met, yet their fates were about to collide in the most terrifying way. When Seraphina, heavily pregnant, vanished without a trace, all eyes turned to Kael Mercer, the man who had built his fortune on deception. But as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered something far more sinister than a missing woman. Dark experiments, a hidden mistress, and a truth so horrifying that someone was willing to kill to keep it buried. Kael Mercer was a man who seemed to have everything. As a billionaire tech mogul, he had built an empire from the ground up, turning a small startup into a global powerhouse. With his wealth came status, influence, and a luxurious lifestyle most could only dream of. But beyond the business world, he had something even more precious: a beautiful wife, Seraphina Mercer, who was 7 months pregnant with their first child. The couple lived in an extravagant mansion in Manhattan, their lives a perfect picture of success and stability. On the surface, Seraphina had no reason to be unhappy. She had married a man who adored her, lived in a world of privilege, and was about to start a family. To the public, they were the ideal couple, gracing magazine covers and making headlines for their philanthropic work. But beneath the perfection, cracks existed that no one noticed. Those cracks widened into something far darker the night Seraphina disappeared. It started as an ordinary evening. Kael had been attending a high-profile business event across town, an exclusive gathering of industry leaders and investors. He was used to long nights and late meetings, but this time, something felt off. When he returned home close to midnight, expecting to see Seraphina waiting for him, he found the house disturbingly quiet. The mansion, always warm and full of life, felt unnervingly empty. At first, he thought she had gone to bed early, exhausted from the pregnancy. But as he moved through the house, calling out her name, unease began to creep over him. Her car was still parked in the garage. Her purse sat on the kitchen counter, her phone beside it. There was no sign that she had left the house willingly. He checked their bedroom, then every other room, growing more frantic with each passing minute. Kael called the security team, demanding to know if anyone had seen Seraphina leave. The guards at the front gate reported that she hadn't left the property all evening. The doors were locked from the inside, and there was no forced entry. It was as if she had simply vanished. As the hours passed, worry turned to fear. Kael contacted the police, and within minutes, officers arrived, launching an official investigation. The house was thoroughly searched, but there were no immediate clues. No broken windows, no signs of struggle, nothing to suggest foul play. The security footage was the next logical step, but reviewing it only deepened the mystery. Cameras covered every entrance and exit to the estate, yet not a single recording showed Seraphina leaving the house. There were no signs of an intruder, no unexplained movements. The only unusual thing was a single frame of a figure, an unknown woman, walking along the edge of the property. But the image was grainy, her face obscured, and there was no footage of her entering or leaving through any monitored points. Speculation ran wild. The media caught wind of Seraphina's disappearance, turning it into a frenzy of headlines and theories. Some believed she had been kidnapped, taken from the house in a way so meticulous that it left no trace. Others suggested she had run away, that perhaps her perfect life was not so perfect after all. But those closest to her dismissed the idea. Seraphina had no reason to leave. She was excited about her baby, looking forward to the future. She wouldn't have abandoned everything, especially not without a trace. Days passed, and the search intensified. Investigators questioned friends, family, and employees, but no one had any answers. Kael, now desperate, offered a massive reward for any information. but the silence was deafening. The world watched as the story unfolded, waiting for a break in the case. Then, just when it seemed like Seraphina had disappeared without explanation, the first real lead emerged. A neighbor who had been walking his dog that night came forward with a disturbing account. He claimed to have seen a woman leaving the property around the time Seraphina went missing. She was moving quickly, almost as if she didn't want to be seen. But there was something strange. The woman didn't match Seraphina's description. Who was she? And what had really happened inside the Mercer estate that night? The discovery of a potential witness reignited the investigation, but it also deepened the mystery. The neighbor who had seen the unknown woman described her as tall, with dark hair, wearing a long coat that obscured most of her figure. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, assuming she was a guest or an employee leaving after a late shift. But now, with Seraphina missing, his statement took on a sinister weight. Detectives scoured security footage from surrounding streets, hoping to trace the woman's movements. They found a partial match, a figure resembling the neighbor's description walking briskly toward a black sedan parked a few blocks away. The footage was blurry, the license plate unreadable, but it was enough to suggest she hadn't simply vanished. Someone had come for her. Meanwhile, investigators turned their attention to Kael Mercer. It was standard procedure to question the spouse in cases like these, and given his immense wealth and influence, they wanted to be thorough. Kael cooperated fully, providing alibis, handing over phone records, and even allowing forensic teams to comb through his estate. He insisted he had no enemies, no reason to believe anyone would target Seraphina. But despite his cooperation, detectives remained cautious. The media painted him in conflicting lights. Some portrayed him as a grieving husband, a powerful man, desperate to find his wife. Others suggested there was something cold about his demeanor, something calculated. Whispers of hidden affairs, business rivalries, and past controversies surfaced. The public was divided. Was Kael Mercer a heartbroken husband or a man with something to hide? Investigators widened their search, digging into Seraphina's life before her disappearance. They interviewed her close friends, her personal assistant, even her doctor. They wanted to know everything: her mental state, her relationships, any problems she might have kept secret. But what they found painted a picture very different from the glamorous, happy life seen in public. Seraphina had been under immense stress. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, she had confided in her assistant that she felt something was wrong. She mentioned feeling watched, uneasy in her own home. She had grown distant from Kael, asking strange questions about his late nights and unusual meetings. She had even started searching for private investigators, though no one knew why. Then came the biggest revelation. Seraphina had been in contact with someone named Ophelia Maddox, a name that meant nothing to detectives at first. But a deeper dive into Ophelia's background changed everything. She was a former model, once linked to Kael in a scandalous affair years ago. At the time, Kael had dismissed the allegations as baseless rumors, and Ophelia had disappeared from the public, shortly after. Now, it seemed she was back. Phone records confirmed that Seraphina had reached out to Ophelia multiple times in the weeks before she vanished. Their conversations were brief, and whatever was discussed remained a mystery. But the most chilling details surfaced when detectives checked Ophelia's current whereabouts. Her last known address was just miles away from where the black sedan had been spotted the night Seraphina disappeared. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together, but the picture they formed was unsettling. Had Seraphina discovered something about her husband's past? Had she confronted Ophelia, only to meet a fate worse than she had anticipated? Or was there something more at play? Something that neither Kael nor Ophelia wanted the world to know? Investigators closed in on Ophelia. More disturbing details emerged. Witnesses reported seeing her in the area just days before Seraphina disappeared. Some claimed she had been watching the Mercer estate, lingering in the shadows as if waiting for the right moment. Others mentioned strange phone calls, muffled arguments overheard through thin apartment walls. Then came the most chilling discovery yet. A set of security camera images surfaced, grainy, but clear enough to identify the woman near the Mercer estate the night Seraphina vanished. It was Ophelia Maddox. The questions multiplied. What had brought her back into Kael's life after all, these years? What had she and Seraphina discussed? And most terrifying of all, was she the key to finding out what had happened that night? The investigation into Ophelia Maddox took a sharp turn when detectives arrived at her last known address, only to find the apartment abandoned. The landlord claimed she had moved out days before Seraphina's disappearance, leaving no forwarding address. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. But as authorities searched the unit, they found something chilling. A small stack of unopened letters, all addressed to Kael Mercer. The letters, though never sent, painted a disturbing picture. They spoke of regret, betrayal, and a desperate plea for Kael to acknowledge something long buried. In one, Ophelia wrote about secrets that couldn't stay hidden forever, about how the truth had a way of surfacing no matter how much power one had. The most recent letter, dated just a week before Seraphina vanished, contained a single ominous line. She deserves to know. The discovery fueled speculation. Had Ophelia and Seraphina met in secret? Had Seraphina learned something that put her in danger? Investigators needed to find Ophelia, but she had covered her tracks well. Her bank accounts had been drained, her phone was disconnected, and she had no known family or close friends. It was almost as if she had been preparing to disappear. As detectives continued their search, another piece of evidence emerged, one that shifted the investigation in an unexpected direction. A local surveillance camera, located several blocks from the Mercer estate, had captured a dark figure disposing of something in a dumpster the night Seraphina disappeared. When officers retrieved the trash, they uncovered something shocking: Seraphina's wedding ring, smeared with what appeared to be blood. Forensic testing confirmed it was Seraphina's blood, but there was a problem. The amount found on the ring was too small to suggest a fatal injury. This raised even more questions. Had she been hurt in a struggle? Was she alive somewhere, unable to return? Or had someone staged the evidence to mislead the investigation? The discovery reignited media frenzy, and with it, a fresh wave of theories. Some believed Seraphina had been killed, her body hidden away by someone close to her. Others suspected she had escaped a dangerous situation, deliberately leaving clues behind. But the most sinister theory suggested something far worse. Someone wanted the world to believe she was dead, even if she wasn't. As the pressure mounted, Kael's behavior became erratic. He canceled meetings, withdrew from public appearances, and refused to comment on the case. His legal team issued statements on his behalf, denying any involvement, but his silence only fueled speculation. The more he retreated, the more people suspected he had something to hide. Then, in a shocking twist, an anonymous tip came through a police hotline. The caller claimed to have seen a pregnant woman matching Seraphina's description at a remote motel just outside the city. The location was obscure, far from any place Seraphina had ever been known to visit. But when authorities arrived, there was no sign of her, only an empty room, recently occupied. The motel's security footage revealed another piece of the puzzle. A woman, visibly pregnant and wearing a hooded jacket, had checked in under a false name the day after Seraphina disappeared. She had stayed for 2 nights before abruptly leaving in the middle of the night, accompanied by an unknown man. The footage was grainy, but investigators could make out one critical detail. The woman clutched her stomach as if in pain. Was she injured? Was she being held against her will? Or had she staged her own disappearance for reasons unknown? As detectives worked to enhance the footage and identify the man, another breakthrough emerged, one that tied everything back to Ophelia. Maddox, a taxi driver who had been following news reports about Seraphina, came forward with a troubling account. The night Seraphina vanished, he had picked up a woman matching Ophelia's description just a few blocks from the Mercer estate. She was nervous, constantly checking her phone, and had given him an address far from the city center. The destination? An abandoned house on the outskirts of town. Investigators knew they were close to something big. If Ophelia was still alive, she held the answers they needed. But as they closed in, one haunting question loomed over them. Was Seraphina still alive too? Or had they been chasing a ghost all along? The abandoned house stood in eerie silence as investigators approached. Weathered wood and shattered windows gave the structure an air of complete desolation, yet the taxi driver had insisted this was where Ophelia Maddox had been dropped off. The location made little sense. There was no record of Ophelia having ties to the area, and no logical reason why Seraphina would be brought here. But as detectives pushed open the rusted door, they realized this place had been occupied recently. Inside, the air was thick with dust, but certain details stood out. A blanket was folded neatly in the corner, an empty water bottle lay on the floor, and scraps of food packaging were scattered nearby. Someone had been here, someone hiding, someone on the run. But the most chilling discovery came when an officer pulled back a loose floorboard. Underneath, wrapped in plastic, was a bundle of documents, photos, and handwritten notes. The documents detailed a financial transaction, one that linked Kael Mercer to a private medical facility overseas. The records showed that payments had been made to the facility under a different name, but the details of the services rendered were vague. More disturbingly, there were photographs of Seraphina, some from years ago, some recent, all taken from a distance as if she had been watched. The notes, scribbled in a hurried hand, contained fragmented thoughts. She doesn't know yet. He'll do anything to keep it secret. He's lying to both of us. The evidence suggested one terrifying conclusion. Ophelia Maddox had been tracking Kael, watching him, waiting for the right moment to intervene. But what had she discovered that was so dangerous? And why had Seraphina reached out to her in the first place? The house yielded no further clues, but forensic teams recovered a partial fingerprint from the documents. A match came back within hours. It wasn't Seraphina. It wasn't Ophelia. It was a man named Dorian Hale, a name unfamiliar to investigators, but one that would soon unravel the truth. Dorian Hale had no known connection to the Mercers, but a deep dive into his past revealed something startling. He had once worked as a private investigator, specializing in high-profile marital disputes and financial fraud. His most recent client, listed under a confidential file, had hired him to look into Kael Mercer. The name of the client was redacted, but investigators had a strong suspicion. It had to be Seraphina. Everything started making sense. Seraphina had suspected something about Kael. She had hired Dorian Hale to investigate. Somewhere along the way, she had come across Ophelia Maddox, a woman who had once been deeply entangled with Kael. But what had they uncovered that led to Seraphina's disappearance? The answer arrived in the most unexpected way. A call came, in from an international number, Dorian Hale himself. His voice was tense, urgent. He had been following the case, and he had something to say. He agreed to meet under strict conditions, warning that Kael Mercer was far more dangerous than anyone realized. When detectives met Dorian at a secure location, he wasted no time. He had been tailing Kael for weeks, uncovering a web of deceit, manipulation, and hidden financial transactions. But what he had found in the final days before Seraphina's disappearance was more horrifying than he had imagined. Kael had been involved in secret medical experiments, ones that required access to unwitting subjects. There were whispers that the facility overseas had been used to conduct experimental treatments, testing on individuals who were never meant to survive. And Seraphina? She had been marked as the next patient. The reason for her disappearance was no longer a mystery. She had uncovered the truth about Kael's dark dealings, and when she confronted him, she became a threat. He couldn't allow her to expose him. But the bigger question remained. Was she still alive? Dorian believed she was. He had traced her last known movements to an undisclosed location, a private estate owned by one of Kael's business partners. But he warned that time was running out. If Seraphina was still breathing, she wouldn't be for much longer. The private estate loomed in the distance, its high walls and heavy security suggesting that whatever was inside wasn't meant to be found. Detectives knew this was their last chance. If Seraphina Mercer was alive, she was somewhere behind those gates. If they waited any longer, they risked losing her forever. A raid was planned with precision. Law enforcement moved in before dawn, cutting off all possible exits. Helicopters circled overhead, casting harsh beams of light onto the sprawling mansion. Armed officers breached the perimeter, storming the property with tactical precision. The guards on duty were taken by surprise, some attempting to flee while others surrendered without resistance. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, too pristine for a place that supposedly hid a captive woman. Room after room was cleared, each one grander than the last, yet Seraphina was nowhere to be found. It wasn't until a locked door in the basement was forced open that the horrifying truth was uncovered. The room was sterile, almost clinical, with bright overhead lights and medical equipment lining the walls. A steel table stood in the center, restraints hanging loosely from its sides. A monitor beeped steadily, tracking vital signs that no longer existed. But the most chilling sight was the empty hospital bed, its sheets wrinkled as if someone had been there not long ago. Seraphina was gone. Desperation surged through the team as they scoured the room for clues. Cabinets were flung open, drawers were emptied, and finally a small locked box was forced apart. Inside, a stack of papers detailed medical procedures, ones that involved unapproved drug trials, unauthorized surgeries, and patient records with missing names. Some documents were incomplete, their pages ripped away as if someone had tried to erase the evidence. But one thing was clear: Seraphina had been here. Then, in a stroke of luck, a discarded syringe was found on the floor, still containing traces of an unknown substance. Forensic teams moved in, collecting everything that could serve as evidence. But just as the investigators were about to leave, one officer noticed something: a faint trail of blood leading to the back of the room. It led to a hidden door, one that blended seamlessly into the wall. When forced open, it revealed a narrow corridor, its cold stone walls damp with condensation. At the end of the hallway, another door stood slightly ajar. Beyond it was a dimly lit storage area filled with medical supplies, and in the farthest corner, slumped against the wall, was a woman barely clinging to life. Seraphina. Her wrists were bruised from restraints, her hospital gown stained with blood. She was weak, barely able to move, but she was alive. Officers rushed to her side, calling for medics as they carefully lifted her frail body. The relief was overwhelming, but the battle wasn't over yet. As Seraphina was rushed to safety, another shocking revelation came to light. Security footage from the estate was retrieved, showing the moment Kael Mercer arrived just hours earlier. But the most damning footage came from a hidden camera inside the medical room, Kael himself, overseeing the preparations for what would have been Seraphina's final procedure. His plan had been cruelly simple. He wanted her out of the way, but in a way that left no trace. A staged medical complication, a falsified death certificate, and a body that would never be found. But the raid had come too soon. The footage was enough to issue an immediate arrest warrant, and within hours, Kael Mercer was taken into custody at a private airstrip. He had been attempting to flee the country, carrying forged documents and a briefcase filled with cash. The once revered billionaire was now shackled in handcuffs, facing charges of attempted murder, human experimentation and conspiracy. As the news broke, the world watched in shock. The empire Kael had built crumbled overnight, his wealth unable to shield him from the truth. Ophelia Maddox, the woman who had risked everything to expose him, remained missing, her fate unknown. And Seraphina, though rescued, would carry the scars of her ordeal forever. But she had survived. She had been silenced, betrayed, and nearly erased. But in the end, the truth had prevailed. And as she took her first breath of freedom, she knew one thing for certain. Kael Mercer's power was gone, and justice had finally been served.